What's up, Blackish fam? It's your boy B. I hope all is well and the new year is off to a good start for everyone. As we transition and we start moving closer to Black History Month, I wanted to take some time to highlight someone that isn't really well known. That was a part of the civil rights movement and really an integral part. And it's so important to remember, like, it's not just February that we need to celebrate Black History Month, but as we know, our information is manipulated, our information is censored. That's why we have this channel, right? Blackish University, modern day griots. You might be asking yourself, what exactly is a griot, right? Well, a griot is someone that passes down your legacy or your history from generation to generation. Before there was, a written history, there were people in the communities, and specifically West areas, Western Africa. They were called griots. They were very highly regarded people in the community that were known to retain large amounts of information, and this information helped new generations make moves and pass down their history, so you don't repeat your same mistakes, right? And we look at that now. And we look at, the civil rights movement, and, one could argue that from Martin Luther King Jr. to Malcolm X to people like Marcus Garvey to Jesse Jackson and all of these fighters that we've had, who is passing on that story, right? Who's not changing the narrative and giving you the good, the bad, and the ugly? And unfortunately, it's not our school system, right? Our school system is very quick to teach you who Christopher Columbus is, and about Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, but the only thing you know about yourselves, if you're a person of color, is that you possibly come from a slave. Things were very bad for you until a civil rights movement. Things got a little bit better, but we're still fighting for change, right? I'm here to tell you that you're so much more than just a colored person that's fighting for rights. Like, if we were just sitting here, there's a whole history of black and brown people before slavery, and it's not what you think, right? We weren't just some, they make us sound like we were just some apes sitting around in Africa waiting to be taken, and that's not the case. Did you know who Mansa Musa was? He goes by a variety of different names, but he was the wealthiest person in the history of the planet. And he's someone that comes from Africa, right? This is somebody who did a pilgrimage to Mecca, right? Hajj. And this guy had thousands of people with him. Talk about an entourage, right? He was passing out gold bars. And word on the street was this guy built a mosque every Friday. Talk about that's balling, right? I'm going to mess around and build a church or a mosque every Friday. It's just a hobby of mine. But a lot of people don't talk about what he did for universities, right? Having where people could celebrate their heritage and their religion. But Timbuktu had some of the best libraries in the world, right? And when Africa was thriving, there were other parts of the world, specifically European civilization, that wasn't doing too well, right? So people would go to Africa for knowledge. Think about that. And think about why there's such a movement to restrict you. Think about how powerful our people are. You've grown up your whole life thinking you're a minority. And, I want to tell you this. You are not the minority. The majority of the world is a brownish or blackish person of color. But you have this really small minority that needs to control power. So what do, right? They come up with things and they hide them under the disguise of nationalism or U.S. history and being a patriot. And there's just a lot of the history that you don't understand and you weren't privy to in school, and it's not your fault. But we're trying to do our job, not just to do reactions on hot new hip hop, right? But also spoken word, also poetry, also stories. The other day was MLK Day. We did a reaction to the I Have a Dream speech and helped break it down. And I also used my legal background to help really let you know what to do in case you get pulled over by a cop, right? What happens, you're not just being harassed. Let's say you do have something on you. What are the steps that you need to take, right? And today I just want to go over just one part of the civil rights movement. It's specifically a person. Her name is Claudette Colvin. And a lot of you might not know that name, right? Because she doesn't get a lot of recognition. Claudette Colvin, she's the woman who refused to give up her bus seat. When back in the day when things were still segregated, you had to sit in the back of the bus if you were a colored person, right? And now you might be saying, no, that's Rosa Parks. I know my history. No, that wasn't Rosa Parks. In fact, Rosa Parks came 9 months after her. And again, it goes to not just white America changing the narrative, but a little bit of what we had to do at the time. And I'm not judging, because sometimes you have to do what you have to do what you want to do. And at the time, this was a young girl, Claudette Colvin, who's still alive today, if I'm not mistaken. She refused to, she was 15 years old. Dark-skinned black chick, sitting there, refused to give her seat up to this older white woman. And the white woman, pulled probably the original Karen, right? But back in the day, that was normal. What did they do? They called the police on her, and they took her, and she actually ended up fighting this in court. And this originally, this was what really, you can argue that there wouldn't have been a bus boycott, and the civil rights movement wouldn't have been the same if she didn't take that step and then take that. She took it all the way to the Supreme Court. Now keep that in mind. Think about the power of a strong, young black woman with no affiliations, nothing, just, I'm not giving up my seat. Why? She was a true fighter and a leader, right? Not to take anything away from Rosa Parks, but what they don't tell you is Rosa Parks was somebody that was already someone that was fighting and participating in the civil rights movement. They needed someone like her. You think of Rosa Parks. She's light complected. She was really well put together. She was married. She became the image of what you needed to sell at that particular time. But in reality, she is someone that actually was mentoring young Claudette Colvin, and Claudette actually boycotted the bus 9 months before her. So think about that. She got her original idea from just a young 15-year-old girl that was fighting the fight, right? Rosa Parks has museums built after her, has a legacy, and this young Claudette Colvin, she's not that young anymore. She barely gets any recognition. Yeah, maybe a street put up in her name, but it's normally a part of history that's just glossed over. So I want to do her some justice and put her name out there into the world so we understand exactly what Claudette Colvin did and who she was. Now, in March of 1955, actually it was March 2nd of 1955, supposedly it was an unusually humid day, and students were leaving Booker T. Washington High School. It was a segregated school in the heart of the Jim Crow South. They had been let out early and they were on their way home, and a group boarded a segregated public bus, which, ended up going through segregated neighborhoods, and eventually, it was filled up with passengers. Now, there was a 15-year-old and what some would call gifted. It's kind of hard to find this history and understand all of the facts, but some people said she was a very intellectual person, and she wanted to be a civil rights attorney. She took a window seat near the exit door, and eventually somebody came up, and a white passenger wanted to sit down, and she refused. Now, keep in mind, this is something that was over 65 years ago, and this woman is still alive and not getting her due credit. She said, they did an interview with her, I believe, on CNN, and she said, man, I was glued to my seat. She said it felt, and this is deep. She says, it felt as if Harriet Tubman's hand was pushing me down on one shoulder, and Sojourner Truth, his other hand, was pushing me down on the other. And she said, learning about those two women gave me the courage to remain seated. Think about that. Two white officers dragged her from the bus, and she kept repeating, it's my constitutional right. She was handcuffed. She was placed in jail, and she was charged with violating segregation laws. And, and that's what I tell people all the time. Just because they're law enforcement, police officers, or there's laws on books, it doesn't mean that it's right, right? History has there's a long history of, slavery being legal, right? The police and people enforcing laws that treated you as property. There's always change that can be made, and this is a young lady who understood that she could fight for change, right? Now, she pleaded not guilty, even though she was charged with violating segregation laws, which she was clearly doing, but disturbing the peace and assaulting a police officer, which they always try to throw on you when you're getting arrested if there's any sort of resistance, right? Now, 2 of the charges ended up being dropped on appeal. I wonder what those were. I'm sure it was disturbing the peace and assaulting a police officer. But really, what she did is basically written out of civil rights history, right? The Montgomery bus boycott started 9 months after her arrest, and the Rosa Parks incident was almost identical. And now people are starting to stop and think, like, who was this young girl? What did she stand for? What happened to her life? And why was she, right? Why is she not included in the textbooks? Who's been experiencing discrimination and segregation her entire life, right? She goes on to recall people basically treating her whole life, right? But she also recalled when she moved to Montgomery. She lived in this low-income black neighborhood, and it was just a bad time. Her sister died from polio right before starting high school, and just the thing that bothered her. She doesn't like the N-word. She said she used to cry when she would hear people using it because she knew the history behind it. But really, it was one of her neighbors. This was, I'm sure, a turning point in her life. One of her neighbors was named Jeremiah Reeves. He also went to Booker T. Washington, and he was 16. Now, keep in mind, this cat was 16 years old. He was sentenced to death by an all-white jury for the rape of a white woman. And you don't hear about this stuff, right? Now, he retracted a confession that was made under stress. I'm sure they were, AKA, whooping that ass. But it also, there was an intervention by the NAACP. Now, what I want to also, I think, is relevant to this story, and what they don't tell you about Rosa Parks, is she was already working with the NAACP, right? She was already somebody that was involved with the civil rights movement. And again, I'm not trying to take away anything from Rosa Parks, but I think it's much easier for a woman, a married woman who has made a firm position to be involved with the civil rights movement and all that comes with it, versus this young 15-year-old girl who's had been discriminated against her entire life, that's decided to make a change and stand up for something. I think that means so much more, and it shows you how powerful young black women can be. After what happened on the bus, she was approached by Rosa Parks, who was a secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP. And for a brief time, they became close, right? Colvin, would stay at Rosa Parks' home. She would be a mannequin. She would act as a mannequin for wedding dresses that Rosa Parks was sewing. So there was a relationship, right? Now, one would say that Rosa Parks actually learned quite a bit about how to stand up, right, and how to bring attention to the situation from this young girl. We go back now and we ask her, how do you feel about what Rosa Parks did and all the attention that she received? And one of her responses, she said that they being the local civil rights leaders, wanted someone to be impressive to white people, like be the poster child, if you would. She said they didn't think that a dark-skinned teenager that came from a low-income area that didn't have any degree could really contribute to that. Right? She said it's like you just weren't recognized as that, and they wanted someone that could be the face. that history has kind of forgot. And, you know, when Stephen Reed, who ended up becoming Montgomery's, the city's first black mayor, he actually recognized her, and I believe there's a street named on her behalf, but she still is not in the history books, right? There's not a museum named after her. There's very little that you can find on her. But, this is a 15-year-old girl who was standing up for what she believed in, strong, knew who she was, and was fighting that good fight before there was social media, before she could brag about it, before Black Lives Matter was behind her, before she had Jesse Jackson and civil rights. Well, Jesse Jackson might have been there. I ain't gonna lie. But just shout out to her, and I believe again that she's still living. So give her flowers, give her roses. No pun intended, of Rosa Parks, but give her flowers before she's gone, right? So just another bit of history. I just hope to pass on, and hopefully it's a name that you remember, Claudette Colvin, the original person who sat on the bus and wouldn't give up her seat, and was instrumental to the whole bus boycott and the civil rights movement. Hey, if you're a fan of, I don't want to say if you're a fan of civil rights, but this station, this channel is not just about music. It's not about spoken word or poetry. We try to bring positive influence into the community. And it might be, sometimes you do what you have to do what you want to do. We review hip hop and we go over songs where there's a lot being discussed, but it's the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're going to take that history and we're going to make sure that it lives on, and some of this knowledge goes to the next generation, even if it's not being taught in schools. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're a fan of being blackish or brownish or person of color.